Laying workers. I know exactly what happened to you when I said that. It sent shivers down your spine. Laying workers are terrible. I hate having to deal with them, but it's really important that beekeepers be able to recognize what leads to laying workers, how to recognize laying workers, and then know what to do about it. So let's just start from the beginning. What leads to laying workers? In a typical honeybee colony, you've got thousands and thousands of worker bees. You've got a few hundred drones, depending on if it's drone production season or not. And usually you have one queen who's the mother of everybody in the nest. Well, queens don't live forever. Let's face it, if you've kept bees, you know this to be true. So your queen dies. What happens? The colony goes into queen replacement mode. So what they do is they select the youngest available female larvae, they feed them royal jelly, they grow those queen cells, and they try to get a queen to emerge, to kill her sisters, to go out and mate, and come back and start laying eggs. If they've done that, they've gotten that queen to the finish line. That's what they want, and in probably 70 or 80 or 90% of the time, a colony that goes queenless or needs to requeen itself, they successfully get that new queen to the finish line. The colony's rescued, life is good, you've got a new queen. But there are times that the queen replacement process fails. Maybe that new queen went out and was caught in a weather storm. Maybe she lost her way home. Maybe she was eaten by a dragonfly or a bird. Maybe the colony chose poorly when producing new queens. Maybe black queen cell virus went through and killed the available queens that were developing. Lots of things can lead to the failure of a colony to requeen itself. And colonies that are queenless are essentially doomed. They are hopelessly doomed. In fact, colonies that are queenless and have no more female offspring from which to rear a new queen will die. So what happens in that context? Well, think about honeybee biology. The presence of a queen in the nest is what limits workers from laying eggs. You see, queens produce a pheromone that says, I'm here, don't lay eggs. In the absence of that pheromone, given enough time, some of the workers in the nest will begin to develop bigger ovaries and become capable of laying eggs. Easy term, we call these workers laying workers. So in a colony of, let's say, 10,000 workers that becomes hopelessly queenless, you may get a dozen or a few more workers that have ovaries that develop large enough for them to be able to lay eggs. Now, worker bees can't mate. So they cannot go out and collect semen. Because they can't go out and collect semen, they have no semen storage apparatus. When they lay eggs, they can't fertilize those eggs, so workers cannot produce female offspring. So for the vast majority of Apis mellifera subspecies, when they lay eggs, because they can't mate, they can't fertilize those eggs aren't diploid, and the eggs are haploid, and haploid eggs become drones in the honeybee world. In fact, that's how queens do it. When queens withhold semen from the egg, she lays an unfertilized egg. That unfertilized egg is haploid. It becomes a male. Well, workers can't mate. They can only lay unfertilized eggs. So for the vast majority of subspecies of Apis mellifera, the western honeybee, these become drones. So when a colony becomes hopelessly queenless and some workers begin to lay eggs, you've got this phenomenon called laying workers. Why is it bad? Well, it's bad already because they can't produce more workers. They can't produce more females to do work in the nest. It will be a colony that is overrun with drones, and ultimately drones cannot cause a colony to continue to exist. So it's doomed in that regard. Another reason that laying workers are so bad is not only do their ovaries develop, and not only are they capable of laying eggs, but they also take on the pheromonal bouquet of a queen. You see, the workers think they have queen because they smell queen in the nest. So a typical beekeeper who's unsuspecting and can't recognize laying workers will go, oh, it's queenless, right? So I'm going to buy a queen and put her in there. They leave her in there. Their bees eat through the candy of the queen cage. They release that queen and then they kill her. And then they do it again and they kill her again. And you're like, why are these workers killing the queen? They think they have a queen. It's the same thing as trying to put a queen in a cage into a colony that already has a queen. When they release that queen from the cage, they're going to kill her. Well, they do the same thing in a laying worker context. So you're feeding these colonies queens, they're killing these queens. That's why it's a problem, but it's also a problem because the colony's doomed. How can you spot laying workers? Well, the first sign is all you have being produced is drone offspring. So initially the queen's offspring will have to emerge out, but at some point all you get is drones. Drones interspersed all over the comb. It's not as patchy as what you see with queens. Queens tend to put drones in patches together at certain spots on the combs, whereas worker bees, they're just sticking those unfertilized eggs everywhere. Another characteristic sign of laying workers is multiple eggs per cell. And not just multiple eggs per cell, but eggs where they shouldn't be. Think again about cell geography. When you look into a cell, the very back wall of that cell, the curved part where the queen deposits the egg, is the back of the cell. So you may see in a cell that has been laid in by laying workers multiple eggs, and those eggs aren't always on the back of the cell. They may be on the top of the cell, or the bottom of the cell, or the side walls of the cell. In laying worker colonies, you may get multiple eggs laid on top of pollen in pollen cells. They just seem to be so happy to lay eggs that they're laying eggs absolutely everywhere. But it's that multiple eggs per cell laid in different spots in the cell that tell me that I probably have laying workers. So I try to match that to the number of drones that I'm seeing be produced in the nest. I then go through the nest and look for the queen. If I don't see the queen, I put all of this together and assume that I have laying workers. Just one quick thing about multiple eggs per cell. Newly mated queens will often lay multiple eggs per cell, but there's two things to know about that. Number one, they're almost always on the back wall of the cell, so you're not seeing them stuck everywhere. And number two, it usually fixes itself in 4 to 6 weeks. A queen that's about a month old or longer will quit laying multiple eggs per cell, whereas workers continue to do this. So what do you do about it? It's one of the hardest queen-related events to fix in beekeeping. They're not going to make a new queen if you give them young brood and they make queen cells, etc. They're not going to accept a new queen if you keep putting newly or fully mated queens in queen cages into the nest. The best way that I have found to requeen laying worker colonies is to use a queen right nuke to requeen that colony. I have a video all about requeening colonies, and in one of those ways I talk about requeening colonies, I talk about requeening colonies using nukes. That's the appropriate way to requeen a laying worker colony. I know a lot of people will take the hives with laying workers and take them far away from the stand, maybe 15 or 20 yards. They shake all of the bees out of that hive and they move the hive back to the stand under the premise that laying workers are too heavy to fly, so they're going to stay away from the nest and not make it back, and all the other workers are going to make it back. That's not a strategy I use. I much prefer to use nukes to requeen colonies. Also, if the laying worker colony is simply too far gone, there's just too many drones and too few workers, you have to ask yourself, are they worth saving? And what I would do in that context is combine those workers and drones with just a strong queen right colony that will take care of it, because my goal at that point is to preserve the bees in a colony, but more importantly, to preserve the combs. If you let a laying worker colony go too long, wax moths or small hive beetles or something else will come in and take out those unprotected combs. So you write the bees off, you put them in another hive, you save the combs to put another colony into someday. One little tidbit of trivia. I kept saying most subspecies of Apis mellifera workers would lay unfertilized eggs. They actually all lay unfertilized eggs, but there's one subspecies, Apis mellifera capensis, which is the Cape honeybee, whose workers can't mate. They can't lay fertilized eggs, but they can lay diploid eggs without those eggs ever being fertilized. We call this Theotokos parthenogenesis. It means that Cape laying workers can produce female eggs that result in workers or queens, but that's another story for another day. Don't let laying workers frustrate you. If you can recognize them, you can fix it, and you can fix it using nukes or by combining laying worker colonies with other colonies.